welcome to this week's episode of Opera and Me. I'm your host, Robert Mellon. I'm very excited about this episode as I bring in one of my dearest friends in the business, Roberto Kalb, who conducted the Magic Flute last summer for Opera Maine. Roberto has conducted at some of the biggest houses in the country, including the Michigan Opera Theater, Florida Grand Opera, and he is the resident conductor at Opera Theater of St. Louis. And this coming season, he had engagements with the Compañía Nacional de Ópera at the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City, Wolf Trap Opera, and he was also going to be making a return to the Florida Grand Opera. I had a lot of fun chatting with him, as I always do. I hope you too enjoy Roberto Kalb. I am sitting here with Roberto Kalb, good friends in the opera world. Roberto, you conducted a fantastic Magic Flute last year for Opera Maine. But it was an interesting situation for you. You had a quick turnaround. You were working in St. Louis at the time, and suddenly you dove into this project. How do you get prepared in such a short amount of time for an opera like the Magic Flute, which is so well known?
Well, luckily, it was a piece that I already knew pretty intimately. So I just had to brush up, basically. Um, if it were another piece, if it would have been the Magic Flute on such short notice without me having ever done it before, then I might have turned it down. But since I hadn't conducted it, I had assisted it. But luckily, when I assisted it, it was a very rewarding experience where um, I assisted David Stern at Juilliard in 2014,
Mm-hmm.
and he was himself an assistant of John Elliott Gardner, one of my heroes with Mozart repertoire. And so when I found out that I was going to assist him in New York, I really did my homework. And so I usually take a long time. I mean, I can learn a score in a short time, but I prefer to take a very long time to learn scores.
What is your process in preparing for a show? And does the process change?
The process doesn't change. I'm very systematic, as opposed to other aspects of my life where I'm not systematic at all. I hate following a schedule. I'm pretty messy. I try to not be super organized. With my score study, I'm very organized and very methodical. So usually, if I have the time, the first thing I do is I do research, and I do historical research. So I'll find out what was happening in the area at the time. I'll try and find a few books on just sort of European history or wherever. And then I'll find the source material and I'll read that. And then I'll get the libretto and I'll read that. With Rigoletto, not too, I mean, I can read it in Italian, so it's fine. So for Magic Flute, I had to really do my homework with the German. Then after that, I start looking at the score. Only then, and then I look at the instrumentation, and then I go do a whole leaf through of the score, just going through it, just broad. Then I go back and I highlight every character with a different color, and I don't do it in a series of just like highlighting everything at once. So I'll choose, I said, the Duke, and then I'll go through the whole score and look for the Duke's music and highlight that. And then as I highlight that, I'm memorizing his lines and singing his music in my mind. And I do that with every single character of the show. Then after that, I go through the whole score again and do instrumentation. So I'll see how many bars of rest did the flute happen, and I'll go through the whole score doing that. Then I go back and I do a harmonic analysis of every piece. And then when I'm done with that, and I've had a sort of a basic skeleton of the piece in my mind, only then do I start just trying to incorporate things musically. Um, because by then I have enough knowledge to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, After that round, last round, I go in and I write bowings for every single string part. I look up bowings from major orchestras, major opera houses to compare what decisions I took to the decisions that the concert masters made, for example. And then I create a set of orchestra parts to my score. And then I found out if there are discrepancies between the orchestra parts and my score. I try not to listen to too many recordings, but there's always, with certain repertoire like Mozart, I try to see, the old school sort of like 1950s, 1960s stuff. And then I try and go and get a taste of what everyone sort of does with certain parts of the piece.
At what point do you begin to, we talked about you researching and putting in the effort into the score. At what point do you gain the confidence to be able to make decisions that make the piece yours and
Mm-hmm.
not just a replication of a previous conductor?
I always say that I admire many conductors. If you ever find yourself thinking that this is the definitive edition of something, then you're not a conductor. Because I'll listen to anything and I always think, oh, well, that sucked. Or like, oh, I could do that better. Oh, well, that phrase really got. And even when I was first assisting, my very first assisting a very small opera company at some point, and even back then, my very first assisting gig, I already thought like, well, why is he doing this? Like, it would be so much better this way. And all my time assisting, I always had ideas that I thought would serve the piece better.
You've been the resident conductor at Opera Theater of St. Louis now for a couple of years. And you were gearing up this summer to conduct a world premiere by Tobias Picker. How daunting of a task is it to take on a new piece that doesn't have any history to it whatsoever, where you're going to kind of set the groundwork for that interpretation?
I think it's less daunting. I think it's less daunting than conducting a staple. It's more of a thrill. And it's music that, at least for Awakenings, that unfortunately we won't do this summer. Um, uh, with Awakenings, the music is so, it's obvious what it is. There's no, Tobias is very clear with, he even writes metronome markings, very clear dynamic markings. The orchestration is transparent, and the affect of the music is totally clear. So it's I think you can have some sort of, it's different, like that if you're gonna conduct the Bach B minor mass or something, what do you have? You have allegro and forte and piano, and then you have to really sort of get historical information. What do you do with all these phrases? Even with Mozart, even with Verdi, you have the metronome markings, but are they really what? Puccini, different challenges where he writes a lot, but you have to interpret within all that writing. It's kind of like Brahms symphonies where he'll write forte, più forte, then later più forte, then later più forte, which is the most più forte. You have to make decisions. With modern rap, the composers know that they're very specific.
A performer, instrumentalist, singer, may have a certain intent, but the accuracy of the phrase, start, middle, end, is not precise. Do they need to go hand in hand, or is there leeway?
I don't think success is accuracy. I think that they're okay. I'll give an example. Like one of my favorite conductors, Carlos Kleiber. He rehearsed and rehearsed. I think he had something like 56 orchestra reads for Tristan and Isolde, the recording sessions. And by the way, the recording itself is all from rehearsals because he walked out of the recording process before it finished. Anyway, and it still sounds like perfection. But he was so methodical and planned, and everything was super accurate, and down to the articulation of the second clarinet in an inner voice. But when he performed, it seemed improvised. There was a real, you got the sense that he was just doing stuff on the spot. And so there's a beauty about Sure, accuracy, whatever you plan, but then in the moment you can create things, and that's really the beauty of it. If you can find it can sound perfectly rehearsed but still improvised. I think that's where like the magic happens.
Let's get back to the Magic Flute.
Mm.
You got a quite an impressive review from from your performance from Opera News. It said the orchestra sounded just as beautifully blended as the chorus, led by Roberto Kalb. They infused each beat with well sensed feeling that poured over into the next, maintaining unflagging momentum from the tight and lively overture, here with a proto Beethoven quality in the dynamics and attack to the very end. So, what is proto Beethoven, and how does that play into Mozart?
Yeah, I think the reviewer is referring um, to dynamic variants in Beethoven. So we know through letters during Beethoven's lifetime that when he conducted his pieces, I mean, obviously the music has a lot of dynamic markings, but when he conducted his pieces, they say that during sforzatos, he would go like this, like these huge gestures. And so we're led to believe that he wanted, maybe through his difficulty of hearing or whatever, or through the passion in the music, because he felt it was a direct connection to God and an expression of God, that the dynamic spectrum was very wide. And so I think the reviewer is referring to the fact that the orchestra sounded like an orchestra that had a lot of dynamic variety, from very, very loud and forceful to very, very soft. And that's something that I planned on doing. I wanted it to be as close to period practice as I could. So I wanted it to sound as much as like if we were in Mozart's time, I wanted it to sound as close as we could to that sound, or what we believe that sound to be. Chances are, if you go on YouTube or if you go on your Spotify and you type in Magic Flute, you're gonna get, the Schulte recording, or you're gonna Carrion recording, and those recordings are wonderful, but they're slow. And the trend of people that are very knowledgeable about period practice leads us to believe that through the way that the instruments were constructed, the bows and the embouchure and the reeds and all that, that music was probably a little bit faster than was performed in the 70s. And so actually after the gig, you start to think, oh, well, wow, am I really that fast? So I started sort of freaking out. So I got back home, and about a week later, I turned on a few of my favorites, like Gardner and Jacobs, and the period practice people, and I found them to be way faster than I was. Not way, but faster. And so you just have to know what crowd you're in, what people are used to.
Roberto, I got to thank you on behalf of Opera Maine, not only for your great work last summer with the Magic Flute and putting together an incredible musical experience for us all, but for coming on today and talking with us and having a little time of real life chat with a conductor. I think conductors have this aura about them that makes them seem almost intimidating and unapproachable. And that is the complete opposite of how I've always felt about you personally. And I think it's great that people got to see a little bit of that today.
Thanks so much, Bobby. Thanks for having me on.
All right. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Opera and Me with Roberto Kalb. It was great to catch up with an old friend. Join us next week when we have on Amelie Lourdeau, who was our first spirit in our 2019 production of The Magic Flute. Amelie had just graduated from 4th grade and was making her operatic debut. So tune in to see what her experience was like last summer. If you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe to us on YouTube at Opera Maine and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Opera Maine. To play us out this week, Roberto sent me a recording of him conducting the University of Michigan Life Sciences Orchestra in a rendition of Respighi's Pines of Rome. I hope you enjoy, and I can't wait to see you next week.